No, this reminds me. I've heard this before. Guys, have you ever heard of the Dumbbell murder?
No.
What? Oh, let me tell you. So, Ruth Brown became Ruth Snyder after marrying her beau, Albert. So in 1915, they got married. He was 14 years her senior. She was 20 years old at the time, and Albert was 34 years old. Their romance had been sort of a happy accident. She had started working for the telephone company when she was 13 years old and was a telephone operator. She made a misconnection and accidentally rang up Albert at his office. He was the art editor for Motorboating, magazine.
That's wow.
A very successful publication at the time.
Of course it was.
He was extremely rude to her and hung up on her, and then felt some sort of urge to call back and struck up a conversation with him, and they decided to start going out and proceeded on a romantic route.
It's kismet.
It was kismet. So they were out wining and dining, going out on the town, going dancing, drinks, fancy dinners, and all of that. And
she's only 20. What drinks?
She was 19 years old when they met. In 1914.
So it was wine coolers.
Oh,
yes,
it's
the year before that they got married.
It's 1914, then never mind. Yeah, no one cares.
Okay. So they get married, and much to her dismay, after the nuptials are agreed to, she finds that her husband is a sour, curmudgeonly man, some would say very foul-tempered, and was very much a homebody. So after they get married, no more going out, no more fun, and this is even exacerbated by the birth of their only child, Lorraine, in 1918.
Is this guy's last name Killjoy?
No, his name was Snyder.
She knew. She called him, and the first thing he did was be a prick on the phone, and then she's like, oh, he's not...
He can change.
Hey, don't victim shame her.
We don't even know she's the victim.
Well, she is not the victim, actually.
So we can shame her all we want.
She just made bad relationship decisions.
So, like I said, the chasm in this loveless marriage is deepened by the birth of this child. And so the resentment and bitterness build between the two after years and so on and so on. So during this time, the 1920s occur. The jazz age comes into fashion. Ruth becomes the very epitome of what is known as a flapper.
Hell yeah.
She bobs her hair. She goes out... She builds a penchant for drink. She goes out gambling. She loves to play bridge. She goes out all night dancing.
Bridge?
Yeah.
Never thought of bridge as the wildlife.
Whoa! She earns the nickname, quote, Gay Tommy, end quote. I don't know what that... Yeah. She was...
The woman's name is Ruth, and she comes up with the nickname Gay Tommy.
Yep, there you go.
She's a badass. I like this person.
Yeah, totally. I'm digging her.
So she would be out until all hours of the night, and Albert was having none of this. He would stay at home with the baby Lorraine in their Queens Village, Long Island, New York home.
Just pissed, mad as hell.
Stewing, drinking, watching the baby. So Ruth was not a beautiful woman, per se. But she was a tall, statuesque blonde of Scandinavian descent, and she was said to have sort of an electrifying air of sexuality about her.
Nice.
Damon Runyon, the noted newsman, who was also known for Runyon's Tales, which Guys and Dolls, the musical, was based off of.
Oh, of course.
He recovered the trial, which she was eventually involved in, and described her as, quote, a chilly-looking blonde with frosty eyes and one of those marble you-bet-you-will chins, end quote.
Damn.
I've never looked at a chin and thought that. Yeah.
So this is all well and not good until the summer of 1925, June. During a lunch at Henry's, a cafe in Manhattan, a mutual friend of hers introduces her to his friend, Henry Judd Gray. Their attraction was immediate and a palpable intensity, and their affair would start shortly thereafter. Judd, as he went by, was 33 years old. He was a corset salesman, and he was employed by the Bien Jolie Corset Company, which just means pretty good. The pretty good corset company.
Really?
Yeah.
But it's so fancy, it's French.
Yeah. Well, Jolie refers to being like beautiful, pretty, and bien means good, but it's like, we're pretty good. So he lived with his wife and child in East Orange, New Jersey. Gray was a short, ordinary-looking man that sported large circular eyeglasses, giving him the look of constant surprise, several sources cite. Runyon describes Gray as, quote, an inert, scared, drunk fellow that you couldn't miss among any 100 men as a dead setup for a blonde, or the shell game, or maybe a gold brick, on trial for what might be called, for want of a better name, the Dumbbell murder. It was so dumb, end quote.
Jesus. That's a lot of shade from
This guy's got some snap to his journalism for sure.
Well, you got to think it's the age of sensationalism in the news. So people were looking for sex and violence, and it was like,
so what the hell are we in now?
But there was no radio, there was no social media. It was you read the newspaper and live vicariously through these thrilling tales of the underworld. And these gangsters, now they're going around town with them alls.
This was 1925 still?
This was 1925 when they met. Yes. So Gray was totally under Ruth's spell. She had a large sexual appetite, and their torrential affair included frequent liaisons at the Queens Village house while Lorraine attended school, and even more frequent meetings, afternoons at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Manhattan, where Lorraine was left to fend for herself in the lobby as Ruth would go upstairs to have one off with Judd.
Wow.
Just hang out. I'm going to go bang it out. I'll be right back.
What a great mother.
In fact, their frequent visits were so frequent that the bellboys, the bellhops at the hotel, had learned the lovers' nicknames for one another. Ruth was referred to as, quote, Momsy.
Oh, God.
Yes. And Jed was called Bud or Loverboy.
All right, I'm starting to go a little bit.
So he was working for the weekend, living for the weekend?
So,
still stuck with gay Tommy.
Things are going hot and heavy. Ruth is becoming increasingly unhappy in her marriage, and she starts to constantly complain to Judd of her loveless marriage and how she's wrongfully mistreated by her husband, Albert. She entreats him to aid her in a permanent solution that would make them, one, able to be together, despite his wife and kid, because it was easier for a man to leave his wife than for a woman to leave her husband.
Am I right? As it should be.
It's true. And would also get them rich in the process.
As it should be.
It would come out that during the trial that Ruth had made as many as 7 previous failed attempts to kill her husband.
Jesus.
None of which succeeded, and nor did they elicit any sort of suspicion from her or of her by Albert. So she apparently used like sleeping powders or tried to poison like his tea or made him violently ill, but he was just
He's like, Jesus Christ, how much salt did you put in this soup? And she goes, attempt 6, failure.
Back to the drawing board.
Just another bowl of sleepy stew? I don't get this.
So finally, after a while, this idea just becomes so obsessed upon by Ruth, and she just whittles away at Judd, and he breaks down and agrees to it. Once he agrees to it, he starts heavily drinking, it's noted. So Ruth took out 3 insurance policies on her husband's life. She was helped by Leroy Ashfield. He was a crooked insurance agent that would eventually get jailed for his involvement in the crime. And the last of these 3 policies was worth $45,000 to $48,000 and had a double indemnity clause in it, which means you get double the payout, twice the payout in case of death as the result of a crime or an accident.
It's just basically gambling on death. It's like, come on, murder.
Yeah. Let me kill my husband. Mama needs a new pair of shoes. So now as to the bungled crime itself, this happened on the evening of March 19th and the early morning of March 20th, 1927. Gray had rented a hotel room in Syracuse, New York, and then taken the train down to the city. And then from the city, he took a bus out to Long Island, Queens Village. He was spotted by several neighbors slinking about the neighborhood during the day. It was a cold day, and he was drinking from a flask. Like I said, he had become quite the drunk during this time. So by this point, Ruth's influence over him was total, and he was just agreeing to her every detail. She left the back door open to the family home, according to plan. He snuck inside. They were out this evening at a party, which was very unusual for them. She had also left for him a pair of gloves, an untethered window sash weight, and chloroform. So a sash weight is basically there's these type of windows that swing outward, and there's a counterweight on the side that are on basically a pulley system. Mm-hmm. These things weigh 4 to 5 pounds. They're like little metal bars.
Okay.
So Judd sneaks into the house and waits for the family to come home from the party. It's around maybe 2 to 2:30 in the morning. They come home. Albert is completely hammered because Ruth has been feeding him drinks all night. The family goes to bed, quote unquote. Albert is murdered. Ruth's account is that during the night, a burglar with a, quote, Italian-style mustache, end quote,
of course,
breaks into the house, ransacks the place, kills Albert, and ties her up And she actually wakes her daughter Lorraine with cries of help and tells her to go to the neighbors that she needs help, but refuses help from the neighbors to be untied until the police arrive. So police show up. Things are a little bit suspect.
Just leave it, honey. Just leave it. I'm comfy.
She is not very well bound. She's very, very loosely bound. Could have easily escaped. There's no sign of forced entry. She has reported that $200 have been stolen from Albert's wallet, which is missing, and that her jewels have also been stolen. The police easily find them immediately tucked under the mattress. Albert, he has been beaten with this apparent window sash weight. He has also had chloroform stuffed up into his nostrils and rags, has had his face covered in rags, and then was garroted with picture frame wire.
Ooh.
So the cause of death is not quite sure which is the one that actually killed him, because medical science back then, not so hot.
Like a smorgasbord of death.
Yeah.
He was also shot 9 times.
Set on fire and beat with a rake.
And drowned.
So like I said, the police never suspected for 1 second that it was actually a burglary. A robbery.
Right.
And here is a key piece of evidence. Before Ruth and Albert were ever married, Albert had been engaged to a woman for 10 years, Jessie Guissard, who passed away. And he still held a torch for this woman despite her death. And even after him and Ruth were married, he kept a picture of the woman in their bedroom, and he had a stick pin tie pin that said the letters JG on it.
Aww.
It fell, somehow was discarded onto the carpet during the struggle. Apparently Albert didn't go with the first blow, and there is testimony between different people that say that Judd had to cry for help, and Ruth actually dealt the killing blow to her husband. So this tie pin on the floor, the police find. They say JG. They look at the date book that Ruth had, and they see one of the entries is Judd Gray. After they bring her to the station, they ask her, well, what about Judd Gray? And they bring out this stick pin, and she idiotically goes, oh, has he confessed?
What?
So the police know that
Good
something's
play.
up. They know that they got this woman, that somehow she is involved, and obviously so is Judd Gray.
What's amazing too is how many neighbors saw him like drunkenly like float down to where
Wandering
this was,
around.
almost like he's like wearing a bikini, like just loudly singing Portishead lyrics, like drinking from a fucking bottle.
So the police latch onto this, and they press Ruth. She immediately confesses, but she blames everything upon Judd.
Of course.
They apprehend him. He says he has nothing to do with it, but he's still in the hotel room in Syracuse, and he has the tickets for the train and the bus just thrown in the garbage can right there, and he has the cash on him. So they arrest him. They immediately turn upon one another and blame the other and say, oh, she was entirely responsible. It was all his fault. It was all her fault. It's a he said, she said moment in jail. The story hits the papers. It becomes very, very widely covered. In fact, it got more coverage in the newspapers than the sinking of the Titanic.
Wow.
Their trial starts in late summer 1927. They are found guilty almost immediately.
Both of them just guilty?
Both of them
It's like,
found
yeah,
guilty of
totally.
murder
Boom.
immediately. They're imprisoned in Sing Sing, and they are executed in January 22nd of 1928.
They both got the same day, too?
They both got the same day.
Jesus.
Well, that's romantic.
Right?
There's another little tidbit, though, for murder history in this. One of the most famous newspaper photographs of any tabloid is because of the execution. A photographer, Tom Howard, who worked for the New York Daily News, snuck in on his ankle, strapped to his ankle, to the actual execution of Ruth Snyder.
Whoa.
A small camera, and was able to fire off a shot of her in the electric chair with 2,000 volts running through her, and it made the front page the very next day with the headline, "Dead."
Wow.
Jeez.
You got to think that he probably took like 4 or 5 shots. They had to go through and find the right one. Like,
No,
oh.
I think that he could only really get off one.
Oh, really?
Because
So he nailed that
yeah,
perfect
he nailed
shot.
that one. He had to
He's got
sneak
like a
that thing
cool
in and use a
camera.
cable in his pocket in order to fire off the shot.
Wow.
So yeah, they were both executed on.
Yeah, that's all good and plenty, but so am I going to be dead?
That's why you need to watch out for these insurance papers, Fritz.
Right. Well, I get that now, but am I going to be killed here?